For the server-side authentication, we're going to be doing two things. We're going to be setting up some models and controllers for Mongo, and we're also going to be setting up our Firebase admin, which is going to verify our Firebase token that we get on the client side. Once somebody's verified on the server side, then we can log them in fully on the client side. And once the server-side authentication is done, we will wrap up the client side and hook it all together at the end of this video. Inside of your server folder, we're going to create a new folder called Interfaces. Inside of it, we're going to make a user.ts file. We're going to export default interface iUser. And here we're going to be extending document from Mongoose. Inside of our interface, we're going to want a UID that's a type string, a name that's a type string, and that's just about it. Everything else that we need for Mongo, like the ID or the created at or update at, that's all provided by the document extension. Next, we're going to create a folder called Models. Inside of it, we're going to make a user.ts model. We're going to declare a const user schema, and it's going to be a schema type from Mongoose. And this is going to be equal to a new schema. And inside of it, you're going to pass an object with some options. First, you're going to have a UID. That's going to be of type string. And that's going to be unique, since every user has to have a unique one. You're going to have a name. That's also going to be of type string, but this doesn't necessarily have to be unique, as multiple people can have the same name. At the bottom, you're going to export default Mongoose. You're going to import Mongoose from the top along with the schema. And you're going to do a mongoose.model, pass in the iUser interface that we created in the chevrons because this needs a document type, name it user, and apply the user schema. Next, we're going to create a folder called Middleware. And here we're going to create a file called extract firebase info.ts. This is going to be responsible for taking the Firebase token and then checking with the Firebase admin and then checking to see if this is a valid user or not. If it is, it will return a bunch of user information that we'll need. If not, we're going to probably just return a 401 unauthorized. So we could start at the top by importing our logging from our logging file in our config folder. Next, you can import Firebase admin from Firebase admin. Next, you can also import from Express the definitions you're going to need for your middleware, so request, response, and the next function. You're going to create your middleware now, and you're going to call it extract Firebase info. You can call this whatever you want because we're going to be exporting it as the default. You're going to pass in Express's request, response, and next functions. So this is a real piece of middleware, and we have access to each. Inside of it, you're going to put a little logging statement, just something like validating token or validating user, whatever you want. Then you're going to let the token be equal to the request.headers.authorization?split. You're going to be looking for an empty space, and you're going to want the second item in the array. What this is going to allow you to do is pull out the bearer token, because any token we pass in will have the word bearer in front of it with a space. So the format will always be like that. This is just the standard that we're going to use. And we're going to check to see that if this token exists by just checking if token. This is where we're going to do all of our Firebase admin magic. So you're going to call Firebase admin.auth.verify ID token. You're going to pass in the token. You're going to have a then block with the result passing to a function. And you're also going to have a catch block with an error passing into your function. Inside of the then block, check to see if you have a result. If you do, you're going to add the info to our response so we can pass it to the next function. So what you can do is you can take the res.locals.firebase and make that equal to the result. And you can also do something like passing the fire token as well, as I do here. Then you can simply call the next function and it will move on to your piece of controller or router that you're going to. If not, maybe throw a logging.warning function saying the token is invalid or the token expired, something like that. And if that's the case, we're going to return a response.status of 401 instead of returning the next function because we don't want to continue on to the actual piece of code we want to get to. So you can just pass back a message to the user saying unauthorized. And then similarly in the catch block, you're going to also have some logging, maybe logging the error. And you're also going to have a return here as well. This time, you can probably return a status of something like 500 or 501 if you want, or you could do 401 here as well if you want to protect any errors on your server side. You don't want those to be exposed to the public. You can also pass a message here if you want, or you can pass the error object, whatever you'd like, as long as you're getting the information that you want. If the token doesn't exist, then we can just go ahead and copy this return 401 unauthorized into this else block, and then everything is accounted for. Don't forget to export this function as the default at the bottom of the file. I'm going to copy this request response next function props up here because I'm going to need it when I'm creating my controllers. I'm going to create a user.ts file in my controllers folder that I just created. First, I'm going to create a function called validate. And I'm going to make that equal to what I had before. I'm going to import my next function from Express and then add the request and response to it. I'm going to make this be equal to a function. And then I'm going to create this function a few more times. I'm going to probably just copy and paste this. And we're going to want a few functions for our user controller. The functions that we're going to want are validate, create, login, read all, and that should probably be good enough for now. At the bottom, we can export a default object, pass in our validate, create, login, read, and read all functions. And while we're here, let's go ahead and fill out all of the functions we're going to need for our user controller. All the validate function is going to do is going to tell us if we have made it to this point because this route is protected by the extract Firebase info. So this is simply checking to see if the user is valid or not. You can call the Firebase object here if you want by letting Firebase be equal to the response.locals.firebase. This isn't necessary, but if you want this function to do something for you, like return specific information, you can. We're going to import our user from our models. And what we're going to do is we're going to find one user that's equal to our UID from our Firebase.UID. You're going to add then and catch blocks. The then block will have a user going to a function. The catch block will have an error going to the function. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and check to see if there is a user. We're going to return that user. And if there's not, return some sort of error message. We're going to return the user with a response.status of 200. And the reason that you can pass the user in here is just in case you call the validate function and the user's been edited somehow, you want the newest form or the newest version of that user from the database. If not, you can just return a status saying user not found and change that maybe to a 401. Inside of the catch block, you can go ahead and log the error and then return the error like we've been doing inside of other catch blocks. You'll notice when I save it too that our VS Code settings automatically apply and Prettier automatically formats the code for me. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at the create function. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to just say, hey, we're creating a new creating a new user. And how we're going to do that is we're going to call the UID and the name from the body. We're going to let the fire token be equal to the response.locals.fire token. Here we're going to create a user, and we're going to make that equal to a new user that we imported. We're going to make the ID a new mongoose, which we have to import from the top. We're going to call mongoose.types.objectID. as a function. We're going to pass in the UID and the name. Then we're going to return Mongoose's user.save. We're going to add a then and catch block. Inside of the then block, you can have the new user going to a function. You can log the user if you'd like. And then you can return a status of 201. You can return the new user and the fire token like I'm doing so. You don't actually have to use the fire token in this function, but I'm just showing you different examples of how to pass these variables around. Personally, I normally wouldn't put this here, but I'm just doing this to show you the different information you can use or can update as you go through your function. Inside of the catch block, go ahead and log the error, and then you can return a status of 500 and also return the error like we've been doing with the other catch blocks. Now for the login function, we're going to log it at the beginning like we always do. And basically we're going to check to see if the user exists or not. If they do exist, log them in. If they don't exist, we're going to actually call the create route that we just created above. Again, I'm going to get the UID from the body. I don't need the name this time because we don't use the name to log in. However, if we do have to create the user, the name will still be in the body. We're going to do a user.find1, pass a then block and a catch block as we've been doing. I'm going to go ahead and just paste this in. The catch block errors are always going to be the same. And here we're going to check to say if the user does exist, what we're going to do is we're going to log it and then maybe return a status of 200. And when we return that status, we're going to pass in the user and the fire token again. And then for the else block, what we're going to say, if the user is not found, we're going to register. And then we're going to return the create route by passing in the request, the response, and the next function. Now that we're done that, let's go ahead and create the read function. So how the read function is going to work is you're going to pass in a user ID and it's going to pass back that specific user for you. So to get the ID, we're going to grab that from the request.parameters.userid. User ID is a name that we're going to give it inside of the routes. Again, you can add a logging statement, which is always good if you want to see what's going on your server side. Next, put in a return and then user.findById, pass in that underscore ID, and then add a then and catch block. Then block will have a user and the catch block we're just going to copy from above. So if it does find a user, what you can do is you can check to see if that user is real, if it exists, and if not. If it does, return a status of 200. Again, this time you just have to pass in the user, don't actually pass in a token or anything. And in the else block, you can go ahead and just return a status of maybe 404, saying that it's not found or user not found or just unauthorized, whatever you guys want to put. Finally, for the read all function, I'm just going to copy and paste everything from my read function. The only difference being is that we're not looking for one specific function, or sorry, one specific user. We're looking for all the users. So all you have to do is do a user find with an empty bracket and change the then to users, add the executing before the then. And here you can just return a response of status of 200. And inside of the JSON, you can pass in a count, which can be the length of the users. And you can pass in the actual users array itself. The catch block is going to remain as it has been, always the same. Create a new folder called routes. Inside of it, create a user.ts file. And here we're going to have a couple imports. You're going to import Express from Express. You're going to import the controller from the controllers folder. You're going to import extract Firebase info from extract Firebase info middleware. Here you're going to make a router equal to express.router. Then you're going to add our route definitions. The first one's going to be a router.get. The route name is going to be /validate. you're going to add the extract Firebase info middleware and then finish it off with the controller.validate. The second thing is going to be a router.get, a colon user ID, and then it's just going to call the controller read. Third is going to be a router.get. Third is going to be a router.post. You can do a /create and call the controller.create. Copy and paste that, change this to controller.login and change the post route to login. Then copy and paste the read, change this to read all, and just simply make this a / to finish this off. And then make your export equal to router, which is what we're going to be calling inside of the server.ts file to make sure that we call these routes correctly. Inside of your server file, import your routes that you just created from the top as user routes. And then into that placeholder we put for routes, call a router.use /users, and then add the user routes to that. And now we should have the user routes in here working properly. So what we can do is we can call up Postman again, and we can run the server with a ts-node-dev or nodemon, whatever you guys want to use. Run your server file. And once Postman starts here, what I can do is I can call the users route, and you're going to see that no users are returned. And then if I try and call a different route here, if I decide to call validate and hit send, first it's going to say not found, and that's because I actually took out users. It should be users validate. So let me put that in. And when I call that, you can see that it says I'm unauthorized, and that's because I'm not actually passing it a token. So as far as the server side goes, everything here is working properly. So on a side note, while editing this video, I noticed that I did forget to put one thing in here, and that is inside of the user routes file, you should add this extract Firebase info middleware to both the creation and the login functions. That way we're reading the token for each one properly. So now what we need to do is actually get a Firebase token to test this out. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the client side. We're going to integrate some functions to call this backend the way we need to finish up the authentication chain. So the next place we're going to go is back inside our client folder, and we're going to go to our modules folder to our auth.ts, and we're going to add 2 more helper functions here that we're going to be using for authentication. The first function we're going to be creating is exporting a const authenticate, and it's going to be an async function. And inside of this function, we're going to have a couple parameters we're going to pass in. We're going to pass in a UID as a string, a name as a string, a fire token as a string, and we're also going to have a callback with 2 parameters, an error that can be either string and null, and a user that can either be an iUser that we created before or null. The callback is going to point to void, and the function is going to point back to void. Once you've set up that complicated function call, we can actually get to work on the inside. Add a try-catch block, and what we're going to do is we're going to call the backend in here to log the user in. Now before we do that, we have to install one package, and we're going to install Axios. Axios is a package I use to call HTTP requests, and it already has type definitions built into it, so you don't need to install types. Inside of the try block, we're going to go ahead and create a new const response, and this is going to be equal to a await, and we're going to call Axios. Inside of this object, the method we're going to have is going to be a post, since we're calling the login route. The URL is going to be equal to our backend /users/login. So how we're going to call that is by calling the config.server.url that we created before /users/login. Next, we're going to add some data. Inside of the data, we're going to pass in the UID and the name. And then after the data, we're going to pass in some headers. And here we're going to say authorization, and we're going to pass in our bearer. And here we're going to pass in our fire token. You might be asking yourself, why do we need a token to log in? Well, we actually need it for Firebase to authenticate the token that you already will have on the client side. After this, you're going to check to see if your response.status is equal to either 200 or 201. And the reason that we're doing that is because there is a chance that if your username doesn't exist, you're going to get a 201 when it is created. And you're also going to account for a 304, which is just Express's way of returning the same route to the user that's called it multiple times. Here, you're going to just maybe log and say, oh, I've successfully authenticated, or they're logged in. And then once you do that, you're going to call the callback function, and you're going to pass in null for the error, and you're going to pass in the response.data.user for the user. If these aren't the responses you get back from Axios, what we're going to do is we're going to call an else after this if block. And what we're going to do is maybe have a little logging function saying unable to authenticate. You're going to run the callback, pass in the same string saying unable to authenticate, and pass in null for the user. Inside of the catch block, we're going to log the error and then pass the same callback as we did for the else block. Now this function is pretty much done, and we're going to create one more function that looks very similar. So I'm just actually going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to call this validate. This function will be used for when somebody first logs into the system to validate the token in local storage. I'm going to get rid of the data, call users validate, make this a GET request, remove the UID and name from the function call so you just have the fire token. And I'm going to change the logging info down here to successfully validated, change this to unable to validate, copy and paste it in these two spots. And then I'm going to get rid of the response.status of 201 because we're not actually creating anything here. And now this validate route is ready to use. Now it's time to integrate these functions and get everything working properly together. So first, let's go to our application page, and where it says validate with the backend, we're going to make a couple changes. First, let's get rid of everything that's in here, and we're going to return a validate, and it's going to pass in the fire token, and we're going to have the callback function here, and we're going to pass in the error and a user prop and call the function. Inside of it, we're going to check for the error, and we're going to check for the user. If there is an error, what we're going to do is we're going to put a little logging statement here and just maybe log the error. And then you're going to call the user dispatch, and you're going to call the logout from our reducer. So you can just copy and paste this one from above. However, if there is a user, what we're going to do is we're going to call login, and we're going to be changing the payload here. And the payload is going to be an object. We're going to pass in the user, and we're going to pass in the fire token. You can also set the loading to false here, just like we did before. And actually what you can do is do the set timeout for these as well, because I still want to keep that delay just to show you everything working in motion. Also in each spot, you can set the auth stage here if you want as well. Here you can say user not found or no credentials found. And then if you do find the user, you can say something like user authenticated. So that's everything we need for the application page. Now let's go to the login page. And inside of it, where we had the little placeholder, if we get a token auth with the backend, what we're going to do here is we're going to call the authenticate function that we created before. We're going to pass in the UID, name, and fire token. And then we're going to have a callback here as well. Similar to the front end, we're going to check to see if there is an error. If there is, we're going to set the error to that, and we're going to set authenticating to false. However, if there is a user, we're going to call the user dispatch of login. Pass in our underscore user as our user, because that's the most recent definition of it, and our fire token here as well. And then you can do a history.push to your main route. Now that everything's created, let's go ahead and test it. Let's see what happens. I'm going to bring up the client, and I'm going to bring up the server. So I'm going to go to my localhost login. It's going to say that I have no credentials found, and it's going to boot me to the login page. So that part's working properly. Now I'm going to click login, and you can see here that it's brought me to my main route, saying that I'm successfully authenticated. If I check storage here, and I go to my local storage, you'll see my Fire token and my Firebase information that's automatically set by Firebase. So you don't actually have to worry about that one. We're just interested in the Fire token. So if I hit refresh, it's going to check my local storage. It's going to see that I'm authenticated. It's going to validate me and then put me to the main page. So that part's working properly. And if you take a look at the server-side logs here, you can see that it connects to Mongo. We do a user login. It logs in the user. It sees that we're not found, so it registers the user. It returns a 201 for the user. And then when I refreshed the page, you could see that it returns a 201 after we validated and gave me my updated user information. So everything here seems to be working properly. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that Navbar component we created. And I'm going to go ahead and add a couple things here to give me some options for logging in, logging out, signing up, etc. So inside of our navigation function component, we're going to make a couple changes. First, we're going to get our user context from our use context and of course the user context that we created before. Then we're going to call a const user, and that's going to be equal to our user context.userState. Next, we're going to make a const logout function, and all this is going to do is call the user dispatch. The type is going to be the logout and the payload can just be the initial user state. The reason that we're doing this here is just because all the logout button is going to do is just clear out all our local storage and empty all our states and make us completely logged out. Inside of the container, after the nav, what we can do is we can check to see if the user ID is equal to nothing. If it's equal to nothing, that means we're not logged in. So we're going to need some register and login buttons. And if it does exist, then we're going to need some other buttons. So first, I'm going to just create a little div here just to give me some room. Create a navbar text, and we're going to give it a tag, and the tag is going to be the link from React Router DOM. We're going to have it go to, using the to call, /login, and this is going to simply say login. We're going to copy and paste this, and then we're going to do the /register and just say sign up. And then I'm going to copy and paste this one more time in the middle, but I'm going to change this navbar text to just be a pipe and not have anything in it except for a class name, and it's going to have the margin right as 2 and the margin left as 2 just to give this some space. So if we're not logged in, that's what we're going to see in the top right of the navbar. I'm going to copy and paste that pipe because I'm going to need it here. And then if we are logged in, I'm going to have 2 buttons. The first button is going to say post a blog. Now, we don't actually have that functionality yet, but we're just going to put this in here for now. We're going to make the button type outline. We're going to give this a tag as a link, and this is going to go to our /edit route. Then we can put a button after this second pipe, and we can call this button the logout button. You can make this button's on click after you create its outline and its size to small. Set that to the logout. And then once you do that, inside of the button text, you can simply just say logout or sign out, whatever you'd like. We can go ahead and save this file. That should be all the editing we need to do. And then we can test this one more time. So go ahead and start your server and client back up, and let's see what happens. So if I refresh here, it's going to see that I'm authenticated, and at the top you can see that it says post a blog or log out. You can see that the posting the blog just takes me to that page, and if I click log out, you can see that these switch to login and sign up. But you'll notice that I'm still on this home page, which is completely okay because the home page is not protected by the auth route. So now if I refresh the page, you can see that I'm not logged in anymore and that the local storage was cleared. If I click the login button, it takes me to the login page. And if I click the sign up button, it takes me to the sign up page, which is essentially the same page. So there you have it, guys. Once you input the server-side authentication and you link it all together, now we have a clean client and server-side authenticated system where the user logs in with Firebase on the client side, and we verify that with what we know in the back end. So thank you very much for tuning into this one, guys, and we'll see you in part 6.